Hope everyone's feeling good today and joining the last session of the BIC Africa training. If you just joined us for the first day, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Always good to know who you are and where you're from. That would be great. And as yesterday and the day before, the session today will last roughly two hours. We've got two sessions today. And I said a few times, but the second session, as you might recall, is the Business Incubator Clinic, where we have quite a few experienced business incubator managers from Europe. And so if you've got any particular questions, any aspect of incubation, they're ready to go for that. And we can address some of those questions in the clinic a little bit later on. So let me just present a couple of slides introducing the session today. So first of all, I'd like to welcome, a great pleasure, Cristina Fanjul, who is the director at, we call it the BIC Asturias, but in Spanish I know is a slightly different name. I won't try to pronounce it. I'll let you introduce that, Cristina.
No problem.
Hola, bon dia, and that's about it. And with Cristina, we're going to be looking particularly about how to develop a vibrant ecosystem. I think we touched on the last couple of days how, certainly from our experience here in Europe, that an incubator cannot really survive by itself. And an incubator needs to be smartly linked to a number of different partners. And Christina's going to tell us a little bit more about how she's managed to develop a very strong network within the region. And then following that, you see we have a number of our EBM members, incubator managers, and we'll address any of your questions generally about incubation and how they're dealing with clients, how they perhaps can improve their deal flow, any questions, again, building on yesterday about finance, access to finance for clients. So any kind of real practical questions that you might have to see how they deal with their daily business on supporting entrepreneurs. We mentioned the last couple of days that this is really an introduction to some of the training we'd like to run out. And we mentioned that the 4 country projects have not started yet. So the 4 country projects at the moment, which are due to take place starting soon, probably after the summer. And that, of course, just to remind you, is in Angola, Ethiopia, Madagascar, and Somalia. They will have local trainings very focused on dealing with particular conditions in those 4 countries, using local experts as well. And our role is to bring this sort of European connectivity to these projects. So in terms of future trainings, we would like to get either by email or again in the chat, what are the subjects you'd like us to work on? And these will be obviously much more tailored to your local country situation. So there we just put a few ideas as topics. We've done some training before. We've worked, for example, with the World Bank, with the InfoDev network, and some of the topics that we're quite familiar with, ranging from setting up an incubator, how to market the incubator, dealing with outreach to your clients, developing mentoring programs, financing, which we touched a little bit on yesterday. And then we could also look at perhaps some sector focus, for example, on agribusiness incubation. So please let us know. As I said, the projects are running for 4 years, and it's very much a co-creation exercise. And so we want to obviously build up services and trainings of particular relevance to your particular ecosystem. So always great to have your feedback. And some of you reached out yesterday to suggest collaboration. That's really much appreciated. And we'll be in contact with you over the coming weeks and months. And again, yes, obviously we'll be putting up regular posts on Twitter and LinkedIn. So without further ado, Cristina, I would invite you to take the floor or take the screen. I think you have to say these days. Thank you very much, Cristina.
Hello. Thank you, Robert. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the session. I'm very nice to say hello to any of you. Let me share my screen now just to start with the presentation. And let me see if it works. It's okay? Can you see the screen?
You're just on the double screen again, Cristina. So
okay,
maybe
okay.
as you did last time, just before we started.
Yeah, you know, but the problem is I cannot. No.
If not, Ruben could share his screen, and Cristina, you could tell Ruben to move on the slides. That's another alternative.
The slides.
The problem is that it's, you know, once the real session starts, it's impossible to recover. Let me see. If not, if I cannot do it, I will ask.
I can, yeah.
Yeah?
I can do it, Cristina, for you.
You can see it?
No, not yet. No.
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 It's okay.
It's not in full screen.
Now it's okay.
No, if you go to configuración de visualización.
No, but it's the same. I have this problem. I have tried before. Let me see. What do you see? The double
the
screen?
Double, yeah, screen. You go
now?
Perfect.
Okay.
Now it's perfect.
Okay, you know, there's always, you know, this kind of surprises just to really enjoy after the session.
We can't hear you, Cristina. You've gone on to mute.
So it's unmuted?
Good. Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Off you go. Thanks so much.
Sorry. As I said before, you know, always surprised to really enjoy after the session. So it's my real pleasure to be here with you. I call this session, maybe for you, it's a business clinic. For every one of us participating, and I include myself, it's a discovery session also, because I just think on this type of session as a way of exchange practices, as a way of exchange situations, as a way to learn for everybody who is participating. So this is my approach, a very practical approach. We call it business clinic. In fact, we don't call it, you know, a kind of master session about anything. So everything is about practice. I will be very, very pleased if you interrupt me and ask questions and discuss different approaches. I think it's the way to really start a very good cooperation. As Robert said before, my name is Cristina Fanjul. I'm based in Spain. I will explain you where exactly in Spain, because it's one part of Spain. Nobody thinks about it when thinking on Spain. Everybody thinks on Mediterranean and so on, but I'm in a different part. I'm director of Business Incubation Center Asturias. As Robert mentioned, the name in Spain we give to our entity is also FEI, so Center for European and Innovation and Enterprises. But in the end, what we feel in the core of our entity is, you know, is the Business Innovation Center heart. And probably all my presentation, all my speech will be around this idea on how be a business incubation center and the added value give to our entity, and, you know, the real advantages and the real objectives you can find through the network. Because the session I'm going to really approach is a very key aspect on, you know, what is the innovation and entrepreneurship world, which is the importance of develop a vibrant ecosystem and engage with different stakeholders. I didn't mention before, but I'm also vice president of the EBN, a very proud member of the EBN. And, you know, some years ago, I really decided to be even more involved in the network because of the real great added value that the network is giving to my entity. So a really proud member, I'm really happy with the services, and of course, very happy with this concrete opportunity. So I'm going to tell you a story because it's the best way to do things. I'm going to tell you the story of why the CEEI Asturias is created and why is the, you know, the mission, the vision, the approach, and what is the part that we really build around this idea of how we build the ecosystem. As you can see now in the screen for CEEI Asturias, this idea of being a bridge, this idea of connection, this idea of network is of course at the core of the strategy. And it should be like this, because even if our situations are different, even if our region are different, there's some kind of general things that we all approach. And all these things could be solved by the way of established networking, of established ecosystem. And this is something that every entrepreneur and every organization having the ambition on provide added value to the entrepreneur should have in mind. This idea of being an interface, this idea of being a bridge, this idea of always try to pack alliances, stakeholders, collaboration, and so on. So this is Asturias, okay? This is Spain. This is the north of Spain. This is the green Spain. We are a small region in the north part of Spain, are regions that 20 years ago had some problems. Had some problems because the traditional way of, let's say, living in the region, the traditional industries, the traditional business fabric were absolutely, let's say, diversification, restructuring. In my region, the wave of the industry, but the very heavy industry, iron and steel, shipbuilding, were really in a decline situation 25 years ago. So really, the region was, you know, in a situation where, of course, they will need to find different paths to really make, you know, the social and the economic welfare of the region. One decision was, of course, probably as many of you can feel that the solution can, you know, go from abroad. And there's, of course, a lot of situations when foreign companies can go to the territories, can create employment, can create activity. But this is not enough, because to be really a region with some perspective of future, you need to really trust on your potential endogenous, and you really need to work to develop this. And in that situation, you know, it was a kind of revolution to think in a kind of entity which will have this mission of really, you know, develop the indigenous, develop the internal knowledge and develop the internal innovation and try to really push opportunities for entrepreneurs and for business. And together with this idea of this sense of urgency 25 years ago, it was the idea of the European Union on creating these centers, this business innovation center. Now to be called Business Innovation Center, you know, is something normal that we can think it's, you know, almost a utility. Innovation is everywhere. Everybody has innovation in mind. But try to think that 25 years ago, it was very revolutionary to have one entity specially devoted for innovation, especially devoted for entrepreneurship. Because at the time, everybody thought at the region that probably, you know, the opportunities should normally came from abroad and maybe land into the territory, but nobody really thinks and have this trust of really, you know, making people and empower people in the region to really create this entrepreneurial mindset. So at that situation 25 years ago, the idea of creating a new model of business incubation centers with very strong link with Europe, with some other international cultures, to have this network of people especially engaged in this innovative entrepreneurship was, as I said before, a kind of revolution. EBN and the EU BIC is really at the core of our organization. I will say is the real keystone of the entity, because at that moment, there are some criteria around this idea of Business Incubation Center. We were at the core of the mission of the CEEI Asturias. First of all, a governance model, public and private. You know, at that time, you know, government was very powerful, and it is. But you know, this idea of sharing knowledge, on sharing networking, on sharing positions between the public and private was experimented, if I can say, at that moment in the governing bodies of the CEEI Asturias. In this sense, chambers of commerce, employers association, the university, different entities from government, and not only one, are still today part of the governance model of the CEEI Asturias. And this was something was pushed by the European business model. After this, the certification of services, I'm aware that you will have a session especially devoted on this, but let me really explain you that being, let's say, a newcomer in the world of entrepreneurship, being newcomer in the world of this complex ecosystem, it's a kind of guarantee, the fact of being certification with another entity, which has in fact two values, because certification is not only an evaluation. It's not only an evaluation if you are good or if you are bad. Certification is a way to improve, because you can see, you can benchmark with others. And this type of services, when you are in your territory and the connection with others who have the same mission as you, the connection with other people who have probably the same problems, probably with different contexts, with different situations, but essentially the same horizontal problems are, of course, very important. So this idea of networking, this idea of being part of something bigger, this idea of taking part in an association who really shape these services, the same as with other, you know, minded professional, we share the same visions about supporting entrepreneurship of innovation. It's of course, and was of course very welcome, and still it is. And the other thing was the focus on innovation. You cannot rely that everyone who is going to knock your door is innovative, but you have the means to provide there with innovation, because, you know, experiencing in business model, experiencing with other entrepreneurs, experiencing in connecting the ecosystem with other players, with other stakeholders, will provide you the competences to really introduce the innovation in every idea you will have on the table. And this was important. It was made, you know, by this idea of participating in this, you know, extraordinary family as it is EBN still today. So with all of this in mind, CEEI Asturias was built, and was built with two missions especially focused in our territory of Asturias. This idea of provide global support, of course, for innovative entrepreneurship as SMEs. We really hands on the field. We really work with these people who, you know, have faces, people who have projects, people who have all this idea of having a company. But we also act even before these people came to you with this idea. We always work to disseminate the culture of innovation, the culture and the valorization of technology, and also the valorization of the entrepreneurial spirit. And everything has this role to promote the modernification and the diversification of the business environment in Asturias. And here I make a point, because many of you work for different entities. Many of you have different visions, you know, of the entrepreneurship process, or even for the innovation process. And it's good, because the starting point is really understand who are you, what are your real objectives, and try to connect these objectives with others who can have maybe different objectives, but you can find this type of connection between them. So what is really important. And even if I'm speaking in, strategy terms, I'm not speaking now about operational process. I'm just speaking about strategy. It's really important to understand what is your role, what can be, and after defining this, after defining the strategy, after defining your mission, your vision, and your values, then you can design the operational services you can provide in the territory. If we speak about ecosystem, of course, there are some theories which are very beautiful, who have very beautiful names, as for example, this F.I.L.E.E model. In the way, what is important before and behind the triple F.I.L.E.E models is to consider the ecosystem as something absolutely dynamic, which needs to be made of different parts that in a, let's say, a simple way of doing things, we can consider three. Government, so all the public sector, university in the sense of academia, in the sense of the entities who are working to really make and improve the talent in the community, and finally, the business. And also the business have different groups, the industry, the established companies, and of course, the entrepreneurship. But this is not enough. A triple F.I.L.E.E model is not enough for the challenges of today. It's not enough here in Asturias, it's not enough in Africa, it's not enough in any part of the world, you can say, because things are becoming complex. And agents have different tasks. Agents have different missions, and there are emerging stakeholders who can also play a role in this, let's say, increasingly complex ecosystem of entrepreneurship and innovation. And I can say now that I will add here the word citizens. It is very important when I speak about entrepreneurship, the citizens, because the entrepreneurship, if you work to really enhance the emergency of and the emergence of new entrepreneurs in the region, you need to have the social dimension into account. You need to think that families need to think that being an entrepreneur is something good for their kids. You need to think that the society recognizes the model of entrepreneurship and the innovation and the role that they can play for a future benefit in the community, for a benefit in the region, social and economic. So it's very important that in the model of ecosystem, you also include actions who really act to the civil society, even in terms of impact. So communicating what you are doing, what is important, your role, what in the case you are, for example, a publicly supported organization, it directly impacts in the economic and the social benefits of the territory. And even with this, spreading the word about how important is entrepreneurship and how important is the social value of have a dynamic community with people empowered to really create business and to really create more employment and better opportunities for our youth for our young people in the future. So whatever you are in the map, you need to think, to have this whole idea of, a model with interacts and who make interaction with everybody. One clarification I would like to make is that when I will put you some examples on how to dynamize this, how to think about the ecosystem and concrete action, the names of the entity are not important. Because of course, probably you are familiar with the role, probably you are familiar with the name of some of them, chambers of commerce, etc. But to really know who are the concrete mission in every territory is something very difficult. Maybe the role of the training center is different here and is different there. But what is important is what is the entity mission, which are, the competences this mission have on the territory, and try to mix and try to find this complementary way of doing things. So whatever I call maybe university, whatever I call cluster, whatever I call business association, I would like to explain what is the mission of the entity and try to think who can play this role in your territory in order to identify those stakeholders. Because as I said before, it's so important. It doesn't. The ecosystem, it's important in every phase of the entrepreneurship. It's important when thinking of generation of business idea, but it's also important when you approach the phase, the startup phase, and even more important when you approach the phase of scaling up. Remember, talking about entrepreneurship is not only about the number of companies you really start up, the number of companies really, started or incorporated. Talking about entrepreneurship is about also scaling. It's about surviving of this. It's about growth. It's about find a way to scale. There's no way that you put a lot of emphasis in the generation without the support to the startup phase or the scaling up. It's not enough also to put your support in only one phase, as is the startup, because you cannot work on the generation. You cannot, add people and making this a regularly and sustainable things. And especially very important for every territory is to have the opportunity and the possibility that these small entities who are put in place, the startup, the small companies, the micro companies that always start as micro, also can grow and can unlock their potential in every part: social, creation of employment, turnover, and of course the internationalization and the creation of links between territories, which is also important. And here we have one thing to ask. So everyone at a certain moment look at maybe Silicon Valley, maybe other ideas as the Mecca for everything. But every territory needs to find their model. And I will say that here in Asturias, we always think in a model which is, of course, innovative. You cannot speak about entrepreneurship without the word innovation. You need to provide, the competences, and you need to provide people with the competences to adapt to this digital world, to really be aware that now today the technology provides a lot of opportunities, and maybe find a way to incorporate them. But it also has to be sustainable in also two terms. It has to be regularly in the future. So once you put a company, you need to really trust in their survival after the years. And also sustainable in the sense of environment, because the way of creating growth, it has been also criticized at this moment, because you cannot think on create benefit for the society if you really destroy the environment. So the Green Deal challenges and the green perspective and the environmental sustainability is also important when you talk about entrepreneurship. And finally, the word that I like the most, inclusive. Because one thing that the Silicon Valley model doesn't have is this sense of social inclusion. I would like to create, let's say, my mission is create, welfare and economic benefit in my territories. And I will, let's say, achieve my mission if even the people who is working in companies, even the people who has a possibility to create a company, does not create for the employees or for the people working on the society, is creating a lot of difference, as it is the case on Silicon Valley. So let's really focus on the things that are well constructed and well built in Silicon Valley, but don't think too much on really replicate this model, because this model is, to my understanding, very based, in top people working with, of course, a lot of innovation, of course, a lot of power, but I'm afraid that this is not creation the kind of social civil society, the kind of society we really need to provide. So in our case in Asturias, we think on Silicon Valley, of course, and the things they are doing very well, because they are doing very well sometimes things, but we're trying to find our own model in order to really create this sense of ecosystem, this sense of regional and economic development. So one evolution we just have at the moment is that at the beginning we all think that the core of our services were the entrepreneur. And still it is the entrepreneurs, you know, sit at the center of our services, the entrepreneur, their needs. But if you don't consider to act also and to have services and to find a way to really make those connections in the territory, if you don't find on making these connections at international level, then probably the services will be something, you know, a program, an initiative alone, but not connected with other so important goals in the territory. So when designing a service, when designing your missions, when designing everything that you would like to have for the future, or even the current you have now, but you sense, you feel you need an evolution, think not only in the entrepreneur, think in the rest of the stakeholders that could help you to really have a vibrant and very dynamic ecosystem. And here we have one example, which is the European Union. When thinking on creating those links, when thinking on creating something bigger, this kind of connections, this kind of common missions and common values for the future, you will not have a very beautiful and single plan, which is made, which is signed, an agreement signed with everybody, which is very beautifully presented to the society. But to really construct, to really build this vibrant and shaking ecosystem, you will need to have concrete achievements. You will need to have concrete projects. So don't be afraid to start, you know, by little things. These little things will have the power to really be bigger, and try to create de facto this kind of solidarity, this de facto of, you know, finding these common values, these common objectives. Even if you have different objectives, it's probably perfectly possible that you have this kind of mix. And in this part, you will create this solidarity, you will create this common trust and these two-way directions to really act for the different services. So after this kind of general introduction, I will go to explain into deep some details of concrete an example of activities we really developed to find and to really shake the ecosystem. So the first part, it's about talent. Yeah, we call academia when we talk about the triple helix model. But in fact, academia is a very generic term. The idea is, where can we find entrepreneurs? Who can help us to find them? And here, with the generation of ideas, when the identification of the entrepreneurs, you can have two strategies. The first strategy is to be reactive. So let's say I'm waiting here, very comfortable in my table, very comfortable in my incubator. I wait for people having an idea. And once we have the idea, they knock my door, they came up, and I provide a very beautiful support to them. It's not enough. It's not enough if you want to create a really difference and you make the difference between in your territory. You need to be proactive. You need to find people who is helping you to identify those people who can have this entrepreneurial mindset. And it's very difficult, I know. I work every day, try to find myself, you know, this kind of, source of talent. What I do is try to develop a lot of relationship with all the entities that have the power, that have the competences and work in education, in really providing competences to people. I, of course, work with universities. Of course, one of my main collaborations is with the university. I have only one public university here in my territory. But of course, I also work with other universities outside Asturias in order to find people who can have this connection and can have this idea of considering my region, Asturias, as, you know, a good place to start up, a good place to develop their business projects. I talk also with training centers or professional centers who provide professional competences to people, because these people, it's also able to identify concrete opportunities that could enrich the the business fabric that could enrich and could be, very good entrepreneurs. They can also work for other companies, maybe after some time working in other companies as a, employee, they can, visualize this opportunity and they can have this entrepreneurial mindset in order to create something in their own. I, of course, work with technological centers, developing R&D, developing innovation. A good way to really transfer this knowledge to the market and to create regional development is help them to really transfer this knowledge. It's not only by licensing, it's not only by ownership of patents, it's also about generation of spin-off of those companies, those technology centers. Then you can have both innovation and both entrepreneurship goals together. But I also work with corporates which are really newcomers to the startup world. There's a lot of corporates today who can have different programs trying to really promote entrepreneurship, trying to really promote those links, or even intra-entrepreneurship, who could be, the first step to really create different and diversify business on the territory. So I will speak a little bit after very specifically about, the collaboration with corporates, clusters, business association. This is very important because it's the sense also of unity, is every, let's say, niche of talent, every niche of cooperation between people is, of course, a good source of talent that can develop this entrepreneurial mindset. And as I said before, civil society association, this is very important also, be connected with the association. Whatever type of civil society is, the people actively participating in those associations is normally people who has this, at least one of the competences or two of the competences, the entrepreneurs have, which is the sense of identifying opportunities and the sense of really having, the volunteer to really contribute with ideas, and especially the execution competences, which are by far one of the most important when approaching an entrepreneurial mindset. And of course, spontaneous, but you cannot rely on spontaneous. Probably spontaneous will find, another way to be supported, but you really need the act in, as proactive, try to really incorporate entrepreneurial mindset in people. And for this, you have different tools. I'm just speaking about, the simple one, which is always entrepreneurial education. You can find alliances with all of these entities to organize seminars, to organize courses, official or informal, visits to everybody, forum of discussion, etc. This is a very good way to really, shake the ecosystem and try to provide the society with this feeling of that entrepreneurship is a real opportunity. Of course, awareness activities, communication activities, hackathons as a way of, mixing people, trying to think in a common objectives and try to develop execution competences, and of course, awards. Because awards is a very good also a tool to really gain and to really incorporate, recognition of the role of entrepreneurs in the territory. An award probably will live, in a world when, awards are, let's say, probably we're doing more awards than we really did, but it's because each award has its own objective. It's the objective of shaking one specific part of the ecosystem. It can be young entrepreneurs, it can be verticals, it can be different stakeholders, maybe financial world, maybe the agro-food sector, maybe, different question. Every award has its own role to provide, and it's a very good tool to also. I give you here, for example, one example of one of the awareness activity we really made with the Polytechnic Engineering School, which is the Girls' Day. The Girls' Day, as you know, in my region, there's the challenge, as probably in many other regions, of incorporating more and more women into the science world, which is one very good challenge because every from from a generic strategy, let's say, or a generic philosophy, if we don't incorporate the technology and the woman approach into technology, the technology will probably have this male approach, and maybe the algorithms, maybe the way of designing things will not take into account we as women with our specific things. So the fact of really promote this idea of the specific role of girls, of women into science is one thing we are very happy to really make every year. And with this, having in mind the possibility of really gaining power of the woman in the world of science, we also find one specific slot to also speak about woman entrepreneurship. So it's a very good activity we make every year. And one specific example also, then the ecosystem, the stakeholders in the ecosystem who really help us to find talent and to really approach this talent are civil society, civil association of Asturian people who is living abroad. Asturias was fundamentally for a lot of years a migrant community. The possibilities in the region for a lot of years were not a lot. A lot of young people, unfortunately, is still going abroad to find more opportunities. But the fact of having this link with those communities, the fact of still having this link with, and I put here a concrete example of Compromiso Asturias, which means engagement for Asturias, as I said, or Asturias Power, which is a very new association with different profile of people, with morely entrepreneurs, morely different profile of peoples, but we still have links with the two type of civil association, because these people who still is engaged with the territory can provide a lot of services and a lot of energy and a lot of concrete actions for the territory and can provide this link. I'm putting here an example, maybe it's very small for you, but I can explain you that this was an activity that the Association Asturias Power developed, I think it was last Christmas. Asturias Power has different connection with Asturias people living in the 5 continents. So they organize one non-stop day, which means that for 24 hours, they develop different connections with the 5 continents. And this is the example of the panel for Africa. For Asturian people living in Africa and developing different professional activities and having different backgrounds, explain for us what are the opportunities in their territories, which are the links we still have with the region. And of course, we create this kind of informal links with people which are really on the base of the ecosystem, because don't forget that when I speak about the ecosystem, we speak about entities, we speak about role, we speak about competences, but finally in the end we're speaking about people, and what is important is people connecting with other people. So it is just an example on how create this kind of ecosystem and where others entities, even having different approaches and having different objectives exactly than entrepreneurship and innovation, can also have a link in our role. And I'm giving you another example of the type of activities we can create to really develop this ecosystem in the generation of ideas, which is the first part of the speech, which is a very concrete opportunity we have in this special situation of COVID, in this special situation of the pandemic. You know that for a lot of months, the only possibility for some people to work was teleworking. And a lot of companies really were aware of the potential of teleworkings and the potential of people working for the company, but maybe living in other places. And our region, Asturias, is very well known as a natural paradise. We have beaches, we have mountains, we have a very good quality of life. even if we are not, such economic and powerful territory. But people, and Asturias people, want to live in Asturias. This is a common thing we have. So really taking advantage of this possibility that the teleworking is created, we create this campaign, which is called Safe Work Paradise, in order to really attract those digital nomads, which at the moment it's not so important that they work, in different places, or London, or Madrid, Barcelona, or Paris, or even Brussels, because those people at the moment can develop their work at their homes, at their places. So here my region developed this campaign, this Safe Work Paradise campaign, where, the fact of creating a kind of services offered to those people, to those digital nomads, can also, attract and making even more attractive the region for develop this kind of work. And of course, all the services have to be, as you can see here, with the sense of community, with the sense of ecosystem. So maybe you are teleworking, maybe you are a lot, you can be at home, but there's one time that you really need to develop your relationship with other people. So the Safe Work Paradise campaign, it's also work with this business and professional development, this putting in place and this putting in common the technological communities. And it's also very focused in creating spaces, co-working spaces in different incubators, in different places, to really provide at least once, twice in the week, a common place for those people to work. Because as you may know now, working alone, it's very difficult. So with this, I just find, the type of examples we are developing here in Asturias to develop this vibrant ecosystem. And now I want to approach the startup and scaling phase, which, as I mentioned before, is the other path. So what type of service we need to offer to those entrepreneurs, and who can help us to better start and scale? The type of service my incubator decided to offer to entrepreneurs is, of course, based around the idea of the business modeling for entrepreneurs, SMEs, the global support in identifying critical points, market research, business and legal advice, IP rights, marketing, economic feasibility, etc. And we provide this by the way of agile methodologies like Business Canvas, Lean Startup, providing also some idea of vertical acceleration programs. I cannot say in so strong words the real support we receive from the EBN community in order to really design, in order to really test, in order to learn continuously about these services. I think it's one of the strengths of being part of a community. You cannot, in such complex environment, you cannot evolve alone, even in your territory or even outside, because there are a lot of people, very minded people working in other parts, and you need to really learn from there the best examples, the best cases practice in order to really incorporate for you. So for this, the EBN structure was absolutely fundamental, and still it is, because it's always very easy, to pick the phone, to speak with a colleague and to try to say, I see you are developing this or developing that. So tell me what is the aim behind, what are, the critical points. And this is, what is the best added value of being part of a community. And the ecosystem is now complex, and the ecosystem does not finish in your territory or even in your country or even in your geographical zone. You need to have those strong links, because a lot of entrepreneurship today are born global, and they feel that the way of internationalization is not the same traditional way of I'm local now, I'm regional now, I'm national now. No, they need to have those strong links with the international. If you an entity don't have these strong links, how can you provide to them with those links? So think that when designing, you need to work in cooperation, you need to work with others who help you to detect the needs and who help you to design the services. This is also another example of, a kind of global service. It's in Spanish, sorry for this, but it's only to see how in collaboration with different entities of the region, we have created one single itinerary, one single services to, for example, a special type of companies, which is the technology-based company, in evaluation, in startup, in scaling up, internationalization, and of course, in access to finance. This is the example of a common chart of services we offer in collaboration with another entities, in this case, with another entities in the what we call the regional development group, which is based by 6 entities having different missions, but having also, you know, in the intersection of those missions, the way of promoting the emergency of new businesses. And we work also with verticals. We work with different verticals, which are always connected with the priority of the regions. One thing that the European Union is pushing for every region is the find to identify the strengths. We call it regional intelligence, strategy of regional intelligence, because it is based on the, you know, on the assumption that every region cannot be strong in every vertical, cannot be strong in every technology, even if it is an ambition of everybody. So each region needs to find their strengths and needs to find what are the main strengths, the main, you know, composition of the let's say research, the composition of the industrial vision, the composition of needs of the society, and trying to find those emerging sectors. And we act in those emerging sections by the way of creating acceleration program. But in each acceleration program, and you can find here different examples of Industry 4.0, Let's Game, which is our acceleration program for video games, mobility innovation for sustainable submission, tourism, which is new ways of, you know, approaching the business, the tourism activity, biohealth, which is for biotechnology and health, and finally creative business lab for cultural and creative industries. But in every part of the acceleration programs, as for example, this example of the creative business lab, we always incorporate collaborating entities, because it's not enough to act in one vertical, you alone as incubator or an acceleration. You need to find those connections with those entities which are working also in the territory in the same vertical. So you can work here, as you can see, with different areas of the university, with different technological centers who can act also for the cultural and the creative. You can work with the association, in this case, the personal and business association of video games, of design. And in the case, and I would like to say this, if it is the case, you can rely on those established. And if it is not the case, you can push to create those groups and those associations or those clusters. UNEVA, which is the video game association, was pushed by BIC Asturias, by CEEI Asturias, when creating these acceleration programs and having this critical mass of people working in the area, we pushed to create this business association. And now it's a fundamental stakeholder for us when working with the creative or the cultural. And of course, this is one example in creative, but if you go by one of the acceleration programs, you will find the session and you will find the collaborating entities, because as I said before, there's no way to work alone to really, if you really need to create a difference between the situation and you want to influence the situation for coming into the future. And as I said before, corporates are playing now a fundamental role, a key role in entrepreneurship. They have developed by themselves different programs. Maybe they can have internal, in-house acceleration, collaborative corporate acceleration. For all of them, once you have designed, once you have one service design, you can collaborate with them. And it's good because every partner is willing to shake really the ecosystem with this fundamental objective of really creating more entrepreneurs and more quality entrepreneurs. And of course, one way to do this is also open innovation programs in which corporates are very involved. We had some examples of open innovation programs we are developed in the region. Let me give you one example, which is the Open Innovation 4.0, which is based on the idea of identifying corporates in the region or corporates who have interest in the region. It can be also multinationals, and try to work with them either identifying technological challenges. With this technological challenge, we organize a call and we try to dynamize the ecosystem in order to create solutions, in order to design solutions to be implemented to really cover those technological challenges. We work with them. We really work not only, in the matching of challenge solution, but we also work and we also provide support for the implementation of the joint project. We have 1 year to really implement the solution, and we even have some financial incentive in order to really make this implementation and in order to scale up. So the goal is to have very nice collaboration into the corporates. Corporates, as you can see here, for example, ArcelorMittal, which is one of the biggest iron and steel companies, EDP, which is an energy company, and all of them have this collaboration with startups and have creating implementation and joint projects as a way to really enhance. And by the way, we have example of one entrepreneur really setting up the company after being, let's say, selected by the tractor company. So yeah, even open innovation is not only a way to really work in the scaling of the business, but also in the startup. And some other example at national level, because EBN works, of course, at global geographical scope, but we also develop national chapters of EBN. And in our case, the Spanish community of Business Innovation Centers is also creating this opportunity. Opportunity also an international level, as it is this program of digitalization for the Atlantic area, or some other projects about, the development and the growth. I see, Robert, that it's approaching the end of the session. I don't know if someone has.
We've got quite a few questions, actually, Cristina. So as you might expect, maybe do you want to wrap up? It's just perhaps in 1 minute with some any final comments you wanted to make?
I would like also to say that access to finance is also a field very important to really create the ecosystem. You cannot think on rely, maybe you have a fund, you have this opportunity of creating a fund, but what is good for your entrepreneurs is to create an overview of funding opportunities and to find all those opportunities who can, really pursuing the entrepreneur during all the phases. You need to develop different alliances and different stakeholders, who can be governments, who can be regional agencies, who can be banks, who can be, of course, private investors. But don't forget, money is important, but it's not the key part. It's not the key part. So yeah, when creating an ecosystem, always think in the access to finance, but really think that before going to the access to finance and before having this sense of urgency from the money, you need to work before, in creating entrepreneurs and in creating good business opportunities.
Thanks so much, Cristina. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and then we'll introduce the other panelists to the final session. And then there's some other questions we can come back to for you, Cristina, after that. And the others indeed might want to add a couple of points. But just then 2 questions in the meantime. As always, not easy questions. But when we're talking about what is a must-have for incubators in terms of courses, knowledge, instruments, those are kind of the 3 things that were mentioned. What do you think is very important to enable incubators, obviously, to then be able to give a full business development support to companies? So those are the 3 things: courses, knowledge, instruments. Anything that really sticks out, which is a must-have?
Which is a must-have for an incubator is people trained to really understand the needs of the entrepreneurs and really able to provide, technical support for them and trying to identify these critical points. Maybe you can consider the physical space one must have. Maybe you can consider a fund a must have, but I can tell you that on the ground, what is important is to have trained people to detect, to identify, and to help entrepreneurs with all the obstacles and all the things they really need to make clear before going to a startup. So I will say people train and connections with, because you cannot provide by yourself all the needs the entrepreneur can have. So people train and connected.
Thank you. And another question before we invite the other panelists is, based on your experience, Cristina, how have you approached and managed your alumni? So obviously companies that have gone through the incubation process, or post-acceleration programs, and that might obviously mean post-incubator programs. So have you managed to support the companies, obviously, after they've gone through different programs?
Yeah, it's of course, you know, the evolution of the BIC Asturias is giving more and more importance to this phase of scaling up, even more than the startup phase, because once you find a way to really have, you know, the loop of the startups, but what is really difficult is the scaling up, and the biggest challenge are in this scaling up. So I think open innovation programs and access to finance at this point of scaling up are absolutely essentials. So for access to finance, we try to develop relationship with those kind of people, with those kind of funds that could support this scaling up phase. This is of course without any because sometimes you have the team prepared, you have everything. What you need is to really give speed to this and to really internationalize. So yeah, I would say connections with series, let's say A, B, well, depending on the situation, connection with those funds able to provide this funding to really escape the situation, even at European level, as it is the EIC accelerator, for example, and internationalization strategies, which also encompass the services to really go abroad, to really open new markets, and to really work in these international connections, which are absolutely essential in the scaling up phase.
Well, thanks very much, Cristina. We'll come back to some of the questions, and indeed the others may like to complement those. In a physical event, I will be saying, please join me in a nice round of applause for Cristina. Thanks very much. I do miss that. And yeah. Cristina, have a little break, have a glass of water.
Yeah, let me finish, Robert, with this, you know, sure, clear statement. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. This is the idea behind all of these, my words.
Yeah, that's great. And I think obviously we endorse that very much from the network perspective. So thanks so much. Yes, go and have a glass of water, relax for a couple of minutes. You deserve a rest. So I can see, in fact, the panelists, I think, have turned on their videos as well. That's great. So I'd like to introduce Homero Cardoso from Portugal, TagusValley, Andrew Johnston from Coventry University, and Pietro da Martino from F.I.L.S.E in Italy. And so, gentlemen, we're going to ask you to do something that sometimes we ask the entrepreneurs to do, which obviously is a bit of a pitch, the famous pitch. So like in say a minute or two, let's start with Portugal, because they played well football yesterday, did very well, I thought. Overall, maybe yes, in a couple of minutes, you can just pitch to us about who you are, your organization, and the companies that you support. Thanks.
Okay, so good morning. My name is Homero. I work at big TagusValley in Portugal. I actually work in the education for innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship programs, but I worked a lot of years in incubation. TagusValley is located in a rural area in central Portugal, and the sort of companies we support are mostly oriented for either forest, tourism, or industrial support. And our areas of expertise are food technology and Industry 4.0. So we also have a couple of companies that are already working in African markets, especially in Angola and Mozambique. So if you're interested in connecting around the subject of education, food, or industry, we're the guys to speak with in Portugal.
That's great. Perfect, Andrew. Great timing as well. You nailed it, as we say. Let's move to Andrew from the UK. Again, qualified for the next round of the football, Andrew?
Just about.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm Andrew Johnston, and I work at Coventry University. I'm actually Professor of Innovation Entrepreneurship in the International Centre for Transformational Entrepreneurship. So we have sort of 4 areas we focus on in terms of innovation entrepreneurship. So the first one is sort of research in the area, but the ones that are most pertinent for today are we provide, me and my colleagues, provide the enterprise training for students and graduates within the university. We also, part of the centre, works very closely with 2 other centres, all part of the same kind of structure. The first is Coventry University Social Enterprises, or CUSE, C-U-S-E. This offers support and facilities for startup firms, both those who are being created by the sort of student and graduate population, but also outside the university as well. Now, these businesses are mostly sort of focused on the city of Coventry and the West Midlands region, so it's kind of locally focused. But the social enterprise remit is about, you know, focusing on businesses that are maybe in the have a economic and social impact in terms of not just about the product they create, but about giving opportunities for employment to, say, the immigrant population or those who've suffered from deprivation in the past. And the other part of the centre is Fab Lab. It's a fabricating laboratory, it stands for. This brings together sort of makers and provides courses and equipment. So if you need sort of a 3D printer and you can't afford one yourself, this enables you to sort of rent it by the hour and receive training on this kind of machinery, laser cutting as well. And again, this focuses mostly on sort of small startups in the Coventry and West Midlands region. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks so much. Let's move over to Italy, sitting top of their table, I think, in the football. Very good, winning all the matches. So, Pietro, yes, please make your little pitch. Thank you. I think I'm just on mute, Pietro. Ah. Can you hear Pietro? I can't hear Pietro.
I can hear. I cannot hear.
No. Might be a connection issue. I tell you what, Pietro, we'll come back to you in a minute. Just shout again, and when we can hear you, we'll come back to you. Let's just go to a question that was sent in to us before, and please put some other questions in the chat. Is there anything really about good incubation practice? Anything you'd like to ask our panel about how they go about their day-to-day business supporting entrepreneurs? And we had a question really about what we might call sort of the selection process. So how do you select the entrepreneurs or the folk who arrive with projects, ideas, and say, I'd like to come and be in your incubator, essentially? How do you go about selecting the ones that you will take in? Homero, should we start with you with that question, if that's okay?
Yeah, okay, no problem. Well, we have a process, of course, that provides, the first step is to set up a meeting around an hour. Anyone can set up it. So you go to internet, you have a schedule, you select the slot you want, and someone from the incubator, from the incubation team, will be there to listen to you and to provide, first advice on what should you do to start to work on your idea. Then if people come back to us after, being challenged to provide some additional information, or to just sometimes transport the idea from their heads to paper, which is a massive challenge. It doesn't seem so, but it is. Then we have a 6-month co-work opportunity for them to develop their idea with us. And around that time, we will find opportunities for them to participate in idea acceleration programs or other activities going on inside the incubator or in our national or sometimes even international network. I would say, going back to what Cristina said in the end about what makes a good incubator, entrepreneurs will select themselves out if you just keep asking them to provide you information on validation, on what they're doing to actually substantiate why this idea is such a great idea. Because as I say, the incubator, the entrepreneurs that have an idea that come to you after the eureka moment, most of them start to feel the idea is not as easy as they thought to implement, and they just go about their lives and think about another idea. So the process is not for you to select, at least for us. It doesn't make sense for me to say that a good idea is a good idea or a bad idea. I absolutely no idea what is going to work, but I can make questions. I can try to understand. I can ask them who have they spoken with, who's the customer, what does the customer say about the idea they have, and through the process, those that find that the idea is not that enthusiastic, they will, run themselves out of the program, and you will end up after 6 months, even earlier. Usually after a couple of weeks, you will have the people with you that really have, a very concrete idea of what they want to do and why and whom with. For us, this is the best way, because, it's that there's something I usually tell to the new entrepreneurs. They ask me if do you think it's a good idea? I have no idea if the idea is good or not, and I'll give you a very quick example why. Twitter, very famous Twitter. He was the Twitter team pitched the idea to the Google CEO, and he didn't enter in it financially because he said Twitter was the poor man's email. And a year after, he tried to buy Twitter for $1 billion or something like that. So if the CEO of Google can't tell what a good idea is, when it's staring him in the face, no one can. And you should let the market and the entrepreneur decide if the idea is good or not. And you should have a process for it. And that's the basic idea we have. So powerful questions. Go back to the market, get out of the office, go to the market, speak to people, try to acquire information, and then decide if you want to go forward or not. And our role is to be there, provide information on how they can test, provide insight, and help them to analyze the information, and that's it.
That's great. Thanks, Homero. Pietro, can we hear you now?
Can you hear me now? Ah,
yes,
great.
Yes,
Thank
super,
you.
yes.
sorry for problem. It's well. Anyway, I'm Pietro from Genova, Liguria, Italy. It's in the northwest of Italy, and it's I'm managing 2 public-owned incubators. So they belong to my regional authority, and it's we have a long history. We started in the 1990, and it's of course, like all the incubators, we are flexible. We are moving toward innovation, and we have a lot of program, of course, linking with university, corporates, and but basically, of course, our goals is to support job creation, economic and social innovation at regional level, of course, with a global vision, thanks to EBA and all the networks that we are building.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Pietro. We'll come back with a question in a minute or two. I'd like though to go to Andrew, as there's a particular question talking about the relationships between universities and incubators. Andrew, I think you're probably best placed for that one. And the question is, what kind of relationship or / contract can a resource center or university have with a business incubator for technology transfer / mentoring to their incubatees?
Thank you, Rob. I saw the question. I think it's quite an interesting question, actually, because it allows us to show how diverse sort of universities can be in their interaction with incubators and startups, really. So, I mean, there's a whole spectrum of interactions from informal to formal. So on the informal kind of end of the scale, it would be maybe an individual academic has a kind of personal relationship or a social relationship with someone within the business. You know, maybe they've met them at a conference or a practitioner event. So, you know, there's kind of informal activities there that academics can offer sort of, you know, indirectly to startups and incubators. Those who want to be in the incubator through, you know, just sort of interaction and general discussion. At the other end of the spectrum, the kind of formal level, in the UK and I know Europe wide, there are very many schemes to provide funding for you know, co-creation of knowledge and collaborative projects between universities and startups and other businesses, particularly those based on incubators. To work together to produce something tangible, you know, a new product or service or a feasibility study, or develop R&D. So I think the advantage of a university is the kind of the diversity and the wide range of expertise available. So, you know, your typical institution will have very many departments, from, you know, sort of science and technology, engineering and maths, through to sort of social science, cultural and creative languages as well. So any kind of support that the business may need, you probably will find in the university. In the UK as well, I think probably about a third of incubators are sort of attached to university, so it makes them very sort of accessible to those based on incubators themselves. So those who are there or thinking of moving to an incubator or based already on incubator, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to you know, to be interacting with those from a university, either on a formal or informal basis.
Great, thanks so much, Andrew. I'd now like to move to Pietro. There's quite an interesting question, difficult one perhaps as well. It's about the governance structure and what could be the best governance structure of a business incubator. Is it private sector or chamber of commerce or government driven? Of course, there could even be combinations of those. Pietro, I know you have a lot of experience, not only in your region and country, but also elsewhere in the world. So perhaps a few comments on that would be appreciated. Thanks, Pietro.
Yes, it's, I read the question when I was reading, so it was very difficult. Yes, because it's okay. The mix, I think there is now the perfect mix of all the solution might be suitable and positive. No, it's depending, of course, what is main goals of incubators and what is how is linked with the regional context, because we do not have to forget that incubators are a regional development tool, local development tools, and of course they start to be a national, a country, or international development tools when they are linked together. So it's if you the contradiction between the conflict between all this, which is more theoretically, it's from private or public incubators models, where it's what is the best. Okay, it's as a public incubators, I manage public incubators. I'm very interested in support local, my regional wealth, my regional economic system, for me, job creation is a very valuable indicator of my activity, and especially in region where employment is the issues. Of course, it's of course, it's a private incubators have some different development drivers. For example, as a private incubator maybe will invest directly in the company, and of course, its profit is might be a positive results for the private incubators. This doesn't mean that public incubators has not to close the balance without any losses. So it's all of us, private or public, has to take care about the balance, the figures. Of course, we need to not lose money, of course. But anyway, we have different drivers, development drivers. One is more linked to profit. The other one is more linked to economic development, regional and local development in terms of job, wealth, innovation, and of course, all the ecosystem. It's I think we have to analyze what we would like to be and how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Pietro. There's a question which I'll ask you all to consider in a moment, a very interesting question about sustainability. The question is, are there successful business models where incubators are able to be sustainable? And if so, what are their sources of revenue? So I'll let you just gather your thoughts about that. But in the meantime, I'd like to go back to Cristina, and a question that popped up actually during your presentation, Cristina, and it's around mentorship. And the question is, what kind of approach is appropriate for entrepreneurs to help them understand and use a mentorship support provided in programs? So I think it's also two aspects, what is the approach to help them, possibly understand and engage with a mentorship program?
Well, I think there's no way a company is in our programs without this engagement with mentorships, which could be internal or external. Our model as incubation is that we have a powerful technical support team. We are lucky to have this, very experienced and back in time, but yeah, depending on the model, you can have this or that. But for me, it's essential because one of the greatest added value you give during the process of entrepreneurship is this feedback of the market, this feedback of different person. You need to contrast this idea, this business model. And so it's absolutely essential. And normally, even with some of entrepreneurs, we are sometimes reluctant, let's say, because I'm the entrepreneur, I know what I have on hands. Normally, after the first or second session, except in any very particular cases, they really understand the value of really contrasting their idea. So I will say nothing which is compulsory in the world of entrepreneurship, it's working well. So I will work more in the sense of awareness about, the benefits of being in the project, which is a benefit they will see after the first session, let's say, after the first session. And the second part was, sorry, Robert?
Yeah, I think it was more to do with the level of support, what is needed, what's sort of appropriate. Any sort of comments on that?
Yeah, depending on the situation, when we have, let's say, the first contact with him, we make, this general idea of the projects, we identify the critical points and we work in them. Of course, they can evolve during the time. Sometimes they arrive for this and they finally get this and get that. But it's all question of the projects. What is important is to have a methodology in order to follow you during this process, because if not, it's very easy, to get lost, in all of things. It's good to have a methodology, it's good to have a path, of course, with enough flexibility to be adapted to the situation and the real concrete situation. But if you don't have this methodology, if you don't have this path, let's touch this, let's touch that, then you will get lost, or the entrepreneurship will always leave you to these concrete points, and you don't have this global overview. So what is important is the design of the service.
Thanks, Cristina. So now let's tackle this tricky subject of sustainability. So I'm going to ask Andrew, Homero, Pietro, and Cristina in that order to comment on that. The question really, Andrea, as you saw, was focusing about, do we know of any successful models? How does it work? And what are the sources of revenue? Those are sort of the areas, always the tricky question, isn't it, about sustainability of incubators? Andrew, you'd like to start on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it is the $64,000 question, isn't it? So especially the kind of in the public realm of putting public money into supporting enterprise, and then, you know, how much do we get back? I mean, it's the things I always think about is about sort of equity shares for the incubator. You know, so the incubator supports the business and everything, and then it's about maybe, you know, taking an equity share or having some kind of agreement whereby, you know, once revenues reach a certain level, so kind of progressive rents or whatever, as businesses progress and survive, and they get past that kind of valley of death into the 3 years of survival, then and they're on a more sustainable footing. I think maybe then it's about if, you know, having a system whereby they can pay more back into the incubator if they wish to stay there, or if the incubator had taken an equity stake or some kind of golden share, then they can you know, sort of reap the revenues there. But of course, you know, the issue is it's you know, that valley of death is quite hard to traverse, isn't it? So there's not many that maybe make it to a sustainable footing that can do that. But so you'd need maybe a big successful one to sort of subsidize the rest. It's tricky, and I think it's something that needs a lot of consideration as well, because you know, it's about the social value of incubators, you know, as well as the economic value, and it's about maybe, you know, sharing those rents with society. That you know, as a society, if we put in the funding and the support to do so, about trying to realize those rents back to then support the next generation of entrepreneurs. So I think they're my thoughts on that kind of area.
Thanks, Andrew. Homero, something to add perhaps as well from your perspective?
Yeah, so in Portugal, most of the incubators are either locally supported or university associated, but they still have to balance the sheet, as Pietro was saying. And the most successful models I know in Portugal are very much based on service to the entrepreneur after company creation. So you'll have entrepreneurial support programs funded by public money in early stage, where people are still developing the idea and validating the value proposition. And then when you get to the phase where they create a company, they start to have opportunities to run themselves for other funds, for investment, and then the company, so the incubator has the opportunity to provide services to the company and get paid out of it. In fact, one of the most successful incubators in Portugal is also a BIC, which is IPN, and they even provide accounting, because they had basically not for the value of the accounting in their balance sheet, but because they had more problems correcting the accounting mistakes that outside accountants made with the companies than they would have if they provided the service. So I would say that you have to create value for the community, which is, as Pietro was saying, job creation mostly, because it's value you're creating, so people are getting paid. You have value being entered into the economy, and then you have to provide value for the companies you have in the incubator. And if you're providing value, they'll pay you for it. So it's a kind of, you know, a mixed game, and it goes back to what Pietro was saying. If you're a publicly funded incubator like mine, your focus is development of companies within your territory or coming into the territory. So you have to focus your communication not only on how much money you made in services, but also in how much money did you provide to the local or regional economy by the way of the work you made with the companies and the success they achieved. And if you're a private company, then you have to find, different solutions, as Andrew was saying.
Great, thank you. Pietro, something to add on your side, perhaps?
Yes, it's when you are managing incubators, you have to pay. Well, we have payrolls, maintenance cost of the building is amazing cost. It's consultancy as well. So you have a lot of cost. It's not easy. It's not easy to balance all these issues. And if you see on the different action that you are developing, especially in pre-incubation, all the scouting and the lead generation action, which doesn't create any revenue, real revenue. And you start to have some revenue if you are developing incubation and you get renting from people, which are entrepreneurs that you are incubating. And of course, during scale up, well, it's okay, start speaking about equity share when you are, the company is on a scale up process. So it's this mix of points, it's quite difficult to manage. I think we need to, before starting to create a solid incubators in terms of revenue balance, I think we need to start to create a solid entrepreneurship framework at regional and government level. So it's the government has to adopt a strong policy on entrepreneurship, and incubators, of course, are the tools to develop this entrepreneurship policy. So with this stronger commitment of the governmental side, it doesn't care that incubators are public or private, but there is a commitment of a government on entrepreneurship. I think it's all the tools, all the incubators facilities, all the programs, scouting will be easily supported by the government, by private resources, and international programs, of course. So it's a good mix. We need to work on incubators, but we need to work before on the framework.
Thanks, Pietro. Cristina, is there anything else left to say on that subject, you think?
Not really. Yeah, not really. I really agree with all my colleagues. It's really depend on your mission. It really depends on, the value of you, of course, that have this risk of have one very important client, which is everything. So you need to really care for your client, try to anticipate their needs and try to evolve. Just to say one thing, in the case of publicly supported companies, it's difficult to find the level of providing, for example, consultancy and not compete with the private sector. So whatever is your solution, try to think also in this, because you are an instrument, a business support organization for the, the benefit of the business community. So yeah, the fact of combining both funding that you need to really have a very strong decision, on the level of services you are providing. And of course, it's absolutely perfect and absolutely beautiful to combine both of them, but think on this, not really going as, as a crazy decisions for specific opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Cristina. And in fact, I'll stay with you if I may, because there was another question that was raised during your presentation about the open innovation initiatives that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, how can an incubator replicate the Open Innovation 4.0 in Africa? Do you think it's possible? And perhaps the answer to that question could be a little bit also, what do you need? What are the conditions to create this sort of initiative around open innovation?
Yeah. Well, the first question is if, of course, it's possible. Of course, it's possible. But I would like to open mind. Maybe it's not Industry 4.0. Maybe it's another situation. So it's true that, you know, digitalization, everything which is behind Industry 4.0 is very powerful, because in the end is connected with this, you know, global trend of digitalization. But Industry 4.0 was also think in a way of also strengthen the industry community in the region as a kind of providing innovation, and for the startups, a kind of provide market. So if you have both in the territory, it's perfectly possible, of course, because this is a global, absolutely global trend. And to be competitive, you need to act in this vertical. But maybe it's not the case. Maybe you need something more specific. Maybe you need something more global. Everything depends on the situation, and everything relies on the design of the things. It's not a decision of, I would like to have this, I would like to have that. Do you have the needs? Do you have the actors? Do you have the stakeholders? Then go for them.
Great, thank you.
Can I add in something there, please?
Course, yes, go ahead. Yes, thank you.
Christina's last point there is really interesting, because I think the notion of sort of Industry 4.0 and sort of enabling technologies to and smart specialization to get you know, businesses and regions going. That last point's the key, isn't it? Because it's not just about these technologies exist and it's about implementing them, but it's about how do you understand them? How do you know that they work for your business? And I think there's a kind of relational angle, isn't there, among sort of incubators and support infrastructure in general, that, you know, you need to have the connections to people who know what they're doing, or you need to understand how it can work for your business. It's not just a kind of panacea where you say, you know, there's this technology, I need it in my business, and my business must have this technology because people are telling me this. It's about, well, you know, how do you use that technology? How do you immerse that technology? And how have you got the absorptive capacity to utilize it properly in your business and the organizational structure to maximize its potential? And do you have the kind of links to people who can show you how you can, you know, use it properly and really benefit your business? So I think that Christina's last point there is crucial. It's about the connections to the technology, isn't it?
Exactly. But I feel really open innovation initiatives are very, you know, very crucial and very powerful tools in order to create, you know, something bigger, which is in fact the end. It's true that I work for the regional development. My model is, you know, a publicly support, and I have a lot of the connection with the SME. So this kind of programs, open innovation program, can create those links and try to think on entrepreneurship not only as, you know, as something isolated, that's spontaneous, giving, you know, competences and giving technology in that area because of, you know, spontaneous things, but something also that can enhance, that can enable your current industries, your current business innovation to really increasing innovation. And for them, of course, to open new markets, because maybe they are good in a horizontal technology which can be applied to this sector or this sector, and you find an incentive for them in order to go this part, because in this part you also have another double benefit, which is, you know, the reinforcing of the strong situation of the competitive situation of the industry in itself. So I think they are very powerful tools that will deserve a lot of attention from the part of incubators.
Definitely.
I'll just add that Pietro spoke about, you know, having awareness about your ecosystem. I think that's fundamental. An incubator, a BIC, has to be connected to the ecosystem, and if your ecosystem is not yet aware of what their strong points are, what there are key specializations or competences or resources, then you should be a part of the process and provide and work on that aspect before. That will be, you know, fundamental for it, because you can pick on the tools that Cristina is using in Asturias to develop, you know, open innovation around Industry 4.0 and apply them to tourism, you know, in Kenya or anywhere, because you know, open innovation tools are not sector specific, they're open innovation tools. So but you need to have an idea of where they're going to create added value for you, you know, in a very concrete way. And then only you can start. Because if you just do it, you know, in, you know, space technology because it's cool or because it's trendy, then you're not going to achieve, you know, very good results with it.
Thanks very much. I'll give you a moment to reflect on another question. A few questions actually were sent in around, as you might expect, the topic of the pandemic and COVID-19. So a few questions about how's that affected your day-to-day running of the incubator? Has it caused problems for your client companies, obviously, because they've not been in physically in the incubator? Have you rolled out some virtual services? So a few sort of thoughts about that from all of you in a moment. But before that, I don't know if there's anybody who could answer a question really about intellectual property. Andrew, maybe you might be a good candidate for this one. It's about the policies of intellectual property in the incubator, and I'm guessing it's related to obviously protecting the client's products and services, innovations, etc. Perhaps you could tackle that one, Andrew, if that's okay.
Yeah, well, from our point of view, those that go through the incubators, they offered support in terms of IP. So it's more of a kind of signposting service in a way to there's courses on sort of IP, what it is, and how to protect it. But if and I'm not aware of any specific examples, but if they were to go down the route of wanting to patent an idea, then there is the support to do that and get that kind of protection there. 'Cause, I mean, the university's got the Intellectual Property Office, obviously, that and it holds a number of patents itself. So I mean, again, the advantage of the university, it has this expertise that it can show people what to do and how IP works, but it's getting them to that sort of disclosure level, really. And a lot of the businesses that have been in the last sort of cohorts of 2 or 3 years have been more kind of lifestyle businesses where IP hasn't really been such an issue at the moment. But should it arise, the university is quite well placed to support that and push through any kind of protections that need be. I mean, of course, other things, sort of trademarks and copyrights as well. There's the expertise there within the university, or we signpost to relevant people.
That's great, thanks. And just to add on our side, it is something that EBN we have offered to our members. Obviously, it's a sort of a basic level of IP understanding for incubator managers, because it was a very, very complex subject. So again, that is something that we could obviously offer to the African incubators as well, if that was of interest. So perhaps then we'll come on to the pandemic situation. So perhaps we'll go Cristina, Homero, Pietro, and Andrew. So Cristina, a few thoughts about how have you been coping over the last year?
Well, difficult times, of course. I will say that the situation evolves a lot. Of course, at the beginning, it was a very risky situation where rules were not clear, and the unexpected duration of the pandemic. It was very uncertain, let's say, at the moment. I'll say that after, incorporating all, let's say, from the physical part of the infrastructure, all the safety measures, we, of course, design protocols of safety protocols, and of course, turn into digital a lot of things. But now that we are recovering, I'm still far from really have a real and good understanding of the situation in the future. Let's say, I have one theoretical point in mind, but the reality is not giving my theoretical point, because in the end, at the moment, we have a lot of applications to come to the incubators, which is something absolutely unexpected. We were thinking on have these flexible spaces, maybe for not full time. But we are absolutely, let's say, over surprised with this unexpected application, because in the end, the incubator at the moment is full. So I think we are still, in the wave. So we were in the part. Now we are in the high. Let's see what's happened for the let's say short period. But in the end, we have also implementing different services, and services offer also to corporates. For example, we are incorporated virtual incubation, not in the sense of entrepreneurship, but in the sense of having, the digital services of some corporates using, you know, not overused servers and this kind of capacity, combined with the a possibility to offer some flexible spaces for them to work here also in the incubator. So I'm still far from having a concrete conclusions of the final situation regarding the physical. But on the other hand, I will say that we have this enhanced capacity to work in digital. Everything cannot be turned into digital. I think this is a lot of learning after, you know, this kind of, let's say, initial happiness, because everything can be still alive, everything you can do this on digital, etc. We are now in the point to really define what is worth in digital, what is worth in mixed or hybrid systems. So we are still in the learning process. Maybe next year I can tell you, you know, what was the final conclusion.
Thanks, Cristina. Homero, on your side.
Yeah, so definitely digital is great, but it's not the same. And there are aspects of connection that are very difficult to transverse over digital, because, you know, chit chat and talk around the coffee machine. So it's a difficult thing to convert into digital. We did do a number of events and try to keep the community alive. I'm not really sure on the economical consequences on the long run, because, well, I think it's still evolving. In the short run, some of the companies we have in the incubator had their best years last year, so they had work like never before. And I'm not even talking about companies in digital areas. So I have companies in forestry that had, you know, the best year during COVID. So it's kind of strange when you have, you know, growing unemployment and, you know, sectors going through very, very rough patches. And then you have other areas where growth is happening and companies are growing and employing people. So it's kind of, you know, a strange situation, and it's still unfolding. So basically, we're returning slowly to the physical aspect, but now we're, you know, going back on the numbers. So not really sure what's going to happen next week. And this is, I think, the fluidity of the situation is, I think, the most relevant aspect, because we're stuck in the middle. We don't want to keep on being fully digital because we're losing, you know, the human aspect of connection, and that is undermining, you know, the ability for the incubator to provide service and connection and to the client companies. But at the same time, we can't be fully physical again. So let's see what happens. But we do have an increasing number of also applications to the incubator. So it's almost business as usual, but it's kind of strange to say it out loud, because everything is still, you know, ongoing. So not really sure yet.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Homero. And Pietro, on your side, how's it been? Just lost you need to unmute yourself, Pietro.
I've been very positive. I have a very positive feedback from this crisis period. It's feedback respects had the role of incubators and the capacity of the incubators to cope with this situation, crisis situation. It's because it's we had been very resilient. We have a strong capacity. Startups has a strong capacity to be resilient in this situation. It's we had a lot of new idea. It's we in Genova, especially in my region, we have to cope with two strong difficulties. One was linked with COVID, and one was linked with dramatic events that happened. It was the collapse of a bridge, which creating a lot of problem for economy, people, everyone. So, and incubators started to be the central point for the reborning action of this area. So it's and around incubators now we are thinking about how regenerate everything and how renovate everything. So this is what's very positive. Of course, during the COVID situation, we worked a lot on digital issues. We worked a lot on skills, competence. We increase entrepreneurial skills of our startups, so of people. And I think so, even this, thanks to this action, now we are stronger than before. And now we are ready to restart with new idea, with a new approach and a more global. And so I'm very positive on that.
Thanks, Pietro. And to Andrew now.
Thank you. Very similar to my previous speakers, previous three speakers here at Coventry. I think, yeah, my colleagues delivering the support sessions, did very well to move everything online and deliver it digitally, and that seems to have been a success. And sort of a revolution in terms of how you could deliver and looking at new ways of delivering and considering it as a way of reaching more people. However, as Homero said, I think it's the social side that suffered, and feedback from participants is it's that, again, there's not that moment where you're talking independently among sort of other people on the course, or the water cooler moments, as you call them. So yeah, it's the social side I think has suffered. I think while digitalization again is opens up scope, it's not a like for like replacement to human interaction, face-to-face interaction. So the other thing as well is sort of in the long term, the kind of ongoing situation means it's hard to plan for the future. So there's a kind of uncertainty in terms of, okay, so when are we back to the normal or the new normal or whatever anyone wants to call it. And again, in the UK, we've got mounting number of cases again into the thousands per day of new COVID cases. So it seems another wave has struck. So it throws a spanner in your works in terms of people. I think people are kind of more keener now to get back to campus and face-to-face delivery. And I mean, this goes to the teaching side as well. But you can't plan, because if you want to, normally you'd maybe put a course on for, say, September, October. But we don't know where we're going to be in September, October. That we're going to have to be, are we going to be digitalized or not? So I think that's the two main points really, that it's the social side that's missing, and it's also the fact you can't plan for long-term issues. But I think, again, like my colleagues, are making the best of it, and I think it's been reasonably successful so far. But how long will that continue for is the question.
Thanks, Andrew. And as time is marching on, a final question then for Cristina, Homero, Pietro and Andrew, in that order. Just a quick 30 seconds. You can be even controversial if you want to. It's the idea about, like, in 10, 15 years time, will there be any real massive changes in the way that we do business incubation? If you were to protect yourself in the future, are there any massive changes, surprises? Don't worry, we won't come and give you the recording in 10 years' time. But any thoughts about that, Cristina?
Well, very easy question, Robert. Thank you so much. Well, I don't think let's say, it is expected a revolution, not in the sense of affecting uniquely and exclusively the entrepreneurship world. I think we are in a constant change and a constant evolution, and the dynamic of the last years is that everything gets a lot of speed. So yeah, I cannot anticipate. I cannot really think even in 5 years term, because the situation is still uncertain. But what I feel is the developing the good connections at the moment with all the ecosystem will provide you a good situation to really anticipate as much as possible the future changes. So if you're alone, if you don't develop this connection, if you don't speak with colleagues abroad, if you don't speak with people, because sometimes these revolutions are also waves that doesn't arrive at the same time at the same places. So yeah, I cannot say a solution, but I can say that part of the solution of the anticipation on the could be connected and be, open-minded and hear a lot of people, and develop this sense of, this sense of identification of problem and strategies for the future, but flexibility and open-minded.
Thanks. I think it was Homero next. Yes.
Yeah. So looking back on the last 15 years, a lot of things changed on the way that incubation is made, because it sort of shifted from business to human, and going to customers, and it used to be the business plan. Now it's the business model, and now it's the lean business model, and now it's get out of the office. Then now it's open innovation. So a lot of things changed, but it's difficult to look forward and see what's going to happen. I think that the key thing is to be, like Cristina said, open-minded, have the notion that you need to keep learning how to do it. There's no really right way or wrong way to do it. It's the way that works in a specific moment and in a specific ecosystem. Change doesn't happen at the same time everywhere, so you have to be aware of what's happening and working in other places, and you have to have the notion of understanding if the critical factors of success of a certain methodology in a certain place are present in your ecosystem or not, and what can you do about it. And I think sometimes there's this idea that you'll find a magical tool and then all the problems will be solved. Every company will be able to use it in the same way. And the reality of it is much messier. So every company is a company, every entrepreneur is an entrepreneur, and the tools are applied in a different way. And there's always someone thinking about how to improve the tools that are in existence and trying out new things. And so I think for the key, I think a lot of things are going to change in the next 15 years, but there's something that is going to be a constant that you need to keep by, which is you have to keep your eyes open, you have to be alert, you have to be aware, and you have to have friends to talk to about your problems and what you can do about them. And especially what Cristina, I usually say that the most valuable asset you have is the list of contacts you have that will call you back if you call them and they don't answer the phone. So I have a couple of friends that do that, and they're very valuable friends. Some of them are here right now. And so I think you have to have the network, and you have to have the idea that it's not written in stone. It's going to change. You're not really sure how, but you're going to follow the flow. And if you have an idea that no one has ever tried before, just try it out. Maybe you'll be the one to, break to start the next big break on incubation.
That's great. Thanks so much, Homero. Pietro, your turn.
Yes, it's I think it's next 10 years. I don't know. Maybe with a lot of things will change. It's maybe just new terminology, for example, new concepts, new technology, okay, new business, new sectors. Well, I think it's in order to be able for incubators to stay, to cope with its mission, and to stay in the market, and to be supportive for economic, for the social development. Of course, I think it's the key element. It's continuously investing in people, in team, in training your staff, in create capacity and new skills in your team and person. This is at all level, at managerial level, staff level, all the line of your team, of your organization has to increase. Managerial level will be not an issue to manage your physical incubator, but it's networking relation will be more complicated, of course, will be more difficult. It's because maybe in the next 10 years, our ecosystem will not be only local. It's now we are building our local ecosystem with our university, our corporates located in our region. But maybe the next ecosystem will be more country level, more international. So we need to acquire competence and skill to manage this as a manager, and of course as a staff and technical providers in terms of business planning, business vision, business, well, all the service IP services. So we need to increase that. We need to invest that, and we will be able to cope with the next challenges.
Thanks, Pietro. That's great. And Andrew, looking into your crystal ball going forward, any thoughts on that?
Well, a rather bland thought that I guess change is inevitable, and seeing you know, seeing the changes of the last 15 years and you know, the shocks to the system around sort of the credit crunch and Brexit and, you know, the pandemic. I think maybe we want a quiet 15 years coming up where nothing changes, apart from the end of the pandemic. But I think change is inevitable, and it's hard to see where it will go exactly. But I think one thing we must remember is that the relational aspect of incubation and entrepreneurship and innovation will always be important. And I think it's about, you know, human to human, you know, face-to-face interaction and being able to learn from one another and interact. And just picking up on what my colleagues have said, I think, you know, that comes through as well in terms of, you know, it's about being able to be places and, you know, understand your market, understand your customers, you know, understand your, you know, co-creators, your collaborators, you know, and learn from one another. And I think, you know, the thing that won't change is there's always going to be a need for sort of face-to-face, human-to-human interaction. And to, you know, just to go back to your opening sort of football analogy, I think, you know, maybe the technology will allow us to, you can watch the game on television from all angles, you can rewind, you can watch it from particular players and angles and things, but you will never substitute for being in a stadium and hearing the chants of the crowd and soaking up the atmosphere. And, you know, the same for a theatre and you know, a music gig as well. All those things, I think there's always going to be a relational element where you need to be there and interact with people.
That's very true, Andrew. Thanks very much. And thanks indeed so much for our speakers of this panel today, and also all the speakers from EBN who joined us the last couple of days. Really appreciate your commitment and time. And perhaps just a couple of final words to wrap up the training. And I'll say a few messages. First of all, obviously, I'd like to thank all the participants who've joined us over the last 3 days. For us, it's been a very exciting opportunity to meet you all virtually. I think I said at the outset, we're very keen to come and visit, in particular, the 4 countries, Angola, Ethiopia, Madagascar, and Somalia, to meet you all, and then hopefully with you design and build this community. We're extremely grateful, of course, to the European Union who are funding this activity. Like EBN a few years ago, at the very start, it's all about building a community of incubators. And we hope that by sharing some of the experiences from our members, you can see how it is of value to build these communities. It is really a people business. I've had the pleasure to visit many incubators around the world, and there is now, I think, as Pietro was alluding to, like almost a global incubator family. And really what we are trying to do here is to take some of the experiences we've had at EBN with European incubators, and we're very keen to come and meet you and share some of our experiences, and also, of course, to learn much more about what you're doing, and to provide this connectivity between Africa and Europe for incubators, but also, of course, as I said at the outset, for client companies. In the project, there are activities coming up probably next year and the year after that to bring incubator managers and some client companies to Europe and vice versa, so we can really build this global community. So just to remind you as well, as some of you perhaps weren't here at the beginning session, there are 4 country projects, 4 nodes, if you like, that have not started yet. The European delegations are in the process of selecting partners to run those country projects that we'll be working closely with, and with them and the incubators, with yourselves, we wish to build and design activities, events, workshops that obviously all make relevance to what you're doing, and especially, as we said, the entrepreneurs. And that's the way we do things at EBN, and we are very much a community-led network. You know, it's the likes of Cristina, Pietro, Homero, and Andrew who say, Robert, come on, we want to do a training on this, or we need to do an event on this, or how can you help my company go international? So we're very responsive, and we want to listen to what the African incubators' needs are. And then with the country projects, once they get started, we can hopefully deliver a worthwhile program and really foster these collaborations. So I think you've got a very good chance of seeing all our speakers coming to see you in the coming years. And a couple of also practical points. I see there's questions about the materials. So indeed, we will contact you after the event with all the PowerPoint presentations. We sent you a survey to complete beforehand, and I think there'll be another survey afterwards, so we can sort of collect some data and feedback. And then, as I said, we're very much looking forward to suggestions for future training programs, obviously potentially virtually to begin with, but certainly we'll be keen working with some local partners and experts to obviously deliver, as I said before, focused, tailored programs, because we fully understand that the regional conditions are very different, and we wish to be able to obviously respond to particular local situations. But hopefully over the last couple of days, you've got a good overview of some experiences from Europe, and some assistance and guidance into how we can all build stronger incubators and support our companies and entrepreneurs. So I'd like again to thank all the participants, all the speakers, and especially for the BIC Africa team for putting this together. Thank you again for the EU delegations for supporting and inviting you all. And we'll be in touch very, very soon. And thanks again for your attendance. It's much appreciated. Thank you.